Welcome back to another video, and today I'll be reviewing some of the new Morphe eyeshadow palettes. Welcome back, and today we are having something very, I would say something that's quite interesting. So Morphe has been redoing quite a lot of their makeup. This has been in a result of their ownership changing. There's still some like legal stuff. For example, Jen Loves, who does great documentary and sort of news piece of makeup news, she has covered quite a lot of the sort of Morphe's bankruptcy that's related to their own old ownership, but now the new ownership, they've been like revamping some things. And I do have to say, some of the things that I've been trying, not all of them have been hits, but there's definitely been like some things that have been like, I have liked quite a lot. So I do think we all were kind of expecting that, okay, they are probably gonna redo the eyeshadow palettes because they haven't been exactly launching new palettes that much as of lately. And we also do know that the eyeshadow trend has been changing. So I think Morphe was one of the original brands who started out this big, huge eyeshadow palette trend, and they did it at a very sort of affordable pricing, which meant that these big palettes were suddenly like available to more of a like consumer market, because previously these sort of big palettes, I think only like makeup artists were sort of able to access those. But they sort of were the one who started out this sort of mass production or a mass craze of big eyeshadow palettes. But trends have been changing, and I think that just shows in their newest launch. So I got these from the newest launch. So I have two of the mini palettes and then one of the bigger 12 pan palettes. And altogether they came out with, now I'm trying to remember, I think there was four big palettes and 6 of these mini palettes. And I definitely do have some thoughts. I used to own a couple of Morphe palettes. Morphe was one of those brands that they did launch in our country. I think it was before COVID, but it was definitely when they weren't as popular anymore, and it was the time when they were having a lot of scandals related to these sort of influencers that they had to collaborate with. So by the time Morphe launched in our country, they had sort of like, they weren't in the top anymore, but they were like starting to go downhill because of some of the sort of like influencer collabs that they did, and also because there was some also because of the codes, because I don't think people had realized just how much the influencers were making money from the influencer codes, and that they were like buying from. And then when this was revealed, and because people hadn't been that transparent about the influencer codes as compared to these days, I think most influencers, for example, that I do follow, they do disclose that, hey, I have a code and I will get a commission out of it. But Morphe was a bit of shady, because I don't think they were encouraging the influencers they collaborated with to sort of disclose the fact that they were also making money off of the code. So they were going downhill train when the brand became available in our country, but I did get some of the products when they launched. So I think I had one of their very big holiday palettes. I also had a 9 pan that was launched with the big holiday palette, and then I did have one of the sort of mid-sized palettes that were the rectangular ones in the plastic packaging. And my previous experience from the Morphe formula was that I do think in the big palette the formulas were okay, and I do also think in the sort of rectangular middle-sized palettes the formula was also okay. In the 9 pan it was pretty bad. I do remember it was this sort of like pinkish neutral combo, which was a lot of eyeshadow palettes that they did kind of launch, but I do remember the bright pink shade in that one, very bad quality. Also the other matte shades, even they were neutral leaning, not good. Also the shimmer quality across all the palettes, it was okay, but it wasn't anything wowing. And at that point we were already starting to get maybe these sort of like more sparkly indie shimmers to the market. So the Morphe formula, it was beginning to feel like, okay, this is nice and okay, but it's getting a bit like old compared to the formulas we were getting. But how are we gonna do this eyeshadow palette review video? We are gonna do this as we usually do. So we're gonna be talking each palette, and there's gonna be 3 demo looks and swatches in this side of the screen when we are talking about the palettes. And then at the end I'm gonna go to sort of overall conclusion that, do I think that are these new Morphe palettes now worth it, and sort of also I'm gonna be now giving the comparison how I feel about the new formula altogether compared to maybe the older formula that they used to have. So let's do so that I'm first gonna talk about the only big palette. So from the big palettes I did get the Rose Frequency one, so it is this one. Overall, I do have to say I will give them credit. I do like this packaging, so these aren't that hideously expensive. The big ones are around 24 euros and the smaller ones are 17 euros. And when you start comparing price per pan, the smaller ones, so these ones only have 6 pans, so 17 euros versus 24 euros, and these have 12 pans. So the smaller ones are definitely a bit more expensive when you start doing the math, and also I do think there is a formula reason why they're also more expensive. In terms of packaging, I do like for drugstore, this is pretty good. Like if you're gonna do plastic packaging, I do think this is as good as you can sort of do with the fact that you're still limited in terms of budget, because I do think that the way that this is designed, it doesn't give out the sort of most cheapest drugstore makeup wipes. So this one, as the name implies, is very, how should I say? It is very rosy, so I unfortunately did have a bit of a boo-boo, so I ordered this online. I was able to get the smaller ones in store, but this one I got online from our Morphe retailer, so these weren't bought through the Morphe website, but through our local retailer. Unfortunately, I had a couple of shades breaking up, but I did get a partial refund, so that's okay. So overall let's first talk about the color story. You're gonna probably see it soon from the looks, but just looking at this isn't perhaps the most diverse in terms of like what kind of looks you're gonna get with this one. I think it's pretty obvious when you look at it just by seeing it. I'm gonna now pop in the looks and swatches, and even from those I think you can see like you do get some variety with the looks with this one, but I do think this is a bit too monotone to be in a 12 pan palette. I think this could have been a 9 pan and you would have gotten basically the same looks that I got in this one. Now about the formula a little bit especially, and this applies now to all the big ones. So all the big palettes have this similar formula combination where they have the mattes, and I do believe the mattes might be the same formula across all the palettes, so even the small ones and big ones. But then with the shimmers, the small pan palettes seem to have one of these like basic shimmers that are included in these big palettes, and then they have these special shades that we're gonna go through when I talk about the smaller ones. But the bigger ones are only gonna have this like basic shimmer formula. Compared to the old shimmer formula, I do think this is what I would say a smoother formula in terms of application, and I do think this is one of those formulas that if you are very adept in using your brushes and you don't want to use your fingers, this is actually a pretty good shimmer formula, because this does pick out as well with a brush then as with your finger. However, in terms of the fact that how does this look on the lid, I think you can see it from the demo looks. It looks nice, but I don't think it's anything like wowing. I do understand with drugstore formulas they are limited in the fact that they can't put these like special like shades compared to maybe indie or more some expensive brands, but it is a bit of a, how should I say, I think for me it was more lackluster on the eyes than I expected, because when I swatched out the shimmer formula it kind of looked promising, but for me I was maybe a bit disappointed in the shimmer formula that is on the big palettes, that it's not as like sparkly as I maybe would have wanted to be. Now with the mattes we are having a bit of a curious situation, so I do think that within across all these palettes, the deeper mattes, so these kind of deep mattes, so this is kind of an interesting matte formula. It is a bit of a formula that almost feels like it's almost a bit like slippery. It's a very soft formula, it picks up with a brush quite easily, and it is very soft but almost like slippery on your lid, so it kind of helps with these very deep shades. So with these kind of shades the formula actually helps because it makes them very easy to blend. However, with a sort of more lighter and mid-tone shades, so for example something like this or something like this over here, I felt that there was quite a lot of building I had to do. It almost with some of the very light shades, and this again goes across all the palettes, it kind of felt that it almost like didn't stick on my lid, or it kind of blended away. So this compared to the other matte formula that we used to have before, definitely this doesn't have the issues that some of the like mattes in their previous palettes had, especially with the deeper ones, or if they were kind of more colorful ones, that they kind of could be patchy to work with. Like I don't think these are patchy per se, but it is very sort of like a bit of a like slippery formula, meaning that it kind of then doesn't always translate the best on your lid, especially with the like paler and the mid-tone shades that I did find that I had to build quite a lot, and then I found the issue that it almost blended away, or it had a bit trouble sticking to my lid area. So overall, I do think now, just generally discussing then about these big palettes, I do think like maybe some of the others, because there's one that is very sort of like berry themed, then they have one that is a very warm neutral, and then there's one that's pretty cool neutral. I think with this particular case, I do think that in terms of variation, the other three that are included in this sort of like a bigger palette series, they could be maybe better in terms of diversity. I think with this one, unless you really like your rosy toned looks, I think this one is maybe a bit more redundant, because I do think with a smaller variation you would have gotten the same amount of looks that I got with this one. So from, I think altogether, like just the formulas that are included, these big palettes, and particularly this color story, this was definitely the least favorite one, and I'm gonna go then at the end tell that which palette type I would recommend more, but for me this was maybe a bit of a disappointment. So let's now then talk about the smaller palettes, and let's start with the Outer Spice one. So it is this one, and then I'm gonna show the insides of it. So this isn't like maybe as mauve-ish leaning as the bigger rose palette. So this is, I think it's a pink palette, but it's a very like warm, almost orangey, peachy leaning pink palette, rather than the rose one, which was I think more of a true mauve-ish rose palette. So what is special about these ones, and why I think these are also priced per pan bit higher compared to the big palettes. So each of these smaller palettes have these two bake shades on the middle, and this is quite of an interesting formula, which I do think has its pluses, and then there are some minuses to it. I'm gonna pop in the looks and swatches while we're talking about it. With this one, I do have to say, I do feel overall I was a bit limited with the looks. Two of the looks looked quite same, even though I did try to use different shades in them. So this isn't also what I would also call the most versatile of these smaller ones, but I do still like this actually much more than the bigger one. So especially like in terms of mattes and shimmers, the same is gonna apply what I talked about the sort of big palette. So the mattes in this one, for the deeper mattes, this new kind of formula is actually pretty good, because it makes the deeper shades easier to blend. But with this mid-tone and lighter shades with this one, again, I did have to do quite a bit building to sort of make it work with the opaqueness that I like with my shadows. Similarly, this has one normal shimmer shadow, so this is the same formula that is included in the shimmers of the big palettes. It's again a nice shimmer formula, but just based on swatches and then how it applied on your lid, I was perhaps expecting a bit more oomph with this one. Now regarding the bake shades, so these special bake shades, they are gonna work, or they are gonna look much more special than most drugstore shadows if you're willing to go through the hassle of wetting them and then using your fingers. So definitely if you want to get your full-on results from these ones, first, how I did it was that I actually sprayed some setting spray onto my finger, and then I went directly with my finger to the pan, and then you get this very, very opaque and very impactful shimmer all over your lid. However, simultaneously, I do have to say that if you go through using water to these shades, they aren't also the most flattering on your lid. They are gonna look very texturized, and this applies to now this first smaller palette, and then the second one that I'm going to be talking about. The shimmers are gonna look very textured if you go through the hassle of using water in them. They are very impactful, but they are very textured. So if you have more mature lid and you want to try getting full impact out of these special bake shades, I don't think it's gonna be looking that flattering. And yeah. If you are able to use them dry, but I do say that when you use them dry, I don't think they look that much more special than the sort of basic shimmer shades that they have one shade over here. So this is definitely now a matter of preferences. Are you willing to go through the hassle of using the water? Is your lid type smooth enough so it doesn't look like cracky or creasy on your lids? And yeah, but if you can use them dry, they definitely will like work out dry, but they aren't just as impactful. Then they are just more like the typical shimmer shades that they have across these ones. I do think in terms of color story, as I said, even though this is a more sort of smaller variation, I do actually still feel that with the bake shades, this is still much more, like, I would say, special compared to the bigger palette, and but this isn't the most versatile. I do think some of the colors that they have within these 6 pans are are more versatile because of the shades, but with this one it's a bit of samey with some of the shades. But I do still think that if you like a sort of pink golden look and you are willing to work with this formula and you accept that it might has its downsides, then this could be a nice sort of option to try out from drugstore. This is definitely, I will give Morphe credit, this is something different than what we usually see from drugstore eyeshadow, but this isn't also because of some of the downsides. Is it going to be it's not definitely going to be my favorite drugstore eyeshadow formula ever. Okay, and then let's discuss lastly the other small palette. So this is the Rich Glitch and this is the more cool toned variation. So similarly in terms of formulas, nothing new again. If you want to get the full effect of the baked shades, you have to wet them, but then you have to consider that it's gonna look quite textured on your lids. The matte shades, same thing as I have said with the previous palettes and also with the one basic shimmer shade, so this sort of dark purple over here. It's a nice shimmer, but it's not perhaps the most sparkliest shimmer that you're ever gonna get. In terms of the looks, I'm gonna pop in now the looks and the swatches. I do actually think this was surprisingly versatile, considering that it is quite of a cool toned neutral leaning palette with a bit of like deep purple shimmer that this has. But I do think in terms of versatility, this was probably the best one out of the bunch. I also do say that in terms of maybe color story, I actually do like this the most because I do kind of gravitate more towards cool toned makeup. I did kind of like the twist that this had, so it had some bit of neutrals, but there was a bit of the twist. I do have to actually say from all the beige shades, this probably had the most impactful one. So this white one, if you go through the wetting this and then putting this all over your lid, it actually did have quite a visible this sort of pink sparkle and then bit of gold in it. So because some of these baked shades, they kind of look in the pan that they might be duochromes, but a lot of them didn't end up looking on your lid just like the normal shimmer shade. But with this one, there was definitely something a bit more special in this particular white shade. So this is also why I'm giving this the best rating. But so I do think that if you are looking for a smaller cool tone option and you don't want to get the big cool tone palette that is in the 12 pan variation and you want something special, then I would maybe actually go and get this one, because I do think that you're gonna get maybe a bit more oomph out of this compared to the sort of bigger cool tone palette that they have in the series. As a conclusion, what would I say about these ones? So I'm definitely gonna say, and I think you can kind of maybe guess it when I talk about this, I would get these smaller ones. The smaller ones, as I said, these have their downsides. I do think there is not everyone are gonna like the baked shades because of the fact that in order to get the full impact, you do have to do some extra steps to them, and they are still not gonna look flattering on all lid types. So there's gonna be like a market for these smaller ones, but not everyone's gonna be a fan. The baked shades, as I said, they do work on their own, but then the effect is quite limited. But I just think that overall, when I have watched the color stories, I just generally think that with these smaller ones, the color stories that they have generally released now are more interesting. These smaller ones, they seem to have a bit more like pop of colors in them, and they are just, for at least for me, more interesting. I do think that these big ones, like, there might be a market for these, and the market is definitely not for me. So I do think that these big ones especially are made for those people who just want something very quick, something easy, and something that they can just use their brushes for. I do think for that kind of makeup user, these big ones are going to be pretty good, and that is probably why most of these are, aside from the one that is more like a bit poppy berry toned, but because most of these are pretty like neutral leaning or toned down. I do think that the market for this is the kind of person who's just looking for something quick and easy to do and doesn't really like to do anything special with their eyeshadows. Considering like what are the options available, for example, in my country and in European drugstores, how would I rate these? I think if you live in US, you definitely maybe have better options. You do have, like, for example, Colourpop, even though I do have seen that I think recently when I have watched Colourpop reviews, a lot of people haven't been giving Colourpop that positive of review, but generally Colourpop, they do have much more interesting color stories, and some of their palettes still are like good quality and are like sort of influencer favorites. I also think you do have, for example, Juvia's Place, which is a brand that does these very bold, colorful eyeshadow palettes. So in terms of US drugstores, you might have more options that I would maybe look into first before buying these ones. For the European drugstore, I would actually say that this is a pretty decent option because unfortunately in European drugstores, especially eyeshadow palettes, not the best quality. You really do have to like know the brands to get. So I think for an European in Europe, like if you're balling on a budget, some of these might actually be an okay option. So I think I would recommend the big palette if you're more of a person looking for something very quick and easy and you don't need these sort of special shades or anything, and you actually really like using your brushes, because as I said, the shimmer formula that is on these bigger palettes, it's actually one of the few formulas that picks out really well with also using brushes. If you're looking for something a bit more special, then maybe look into these smaller ones and just be aware that there are some pros and cons to the bake shades that these smaller palettes have. But anyway, that was sort of my collective review of this Morphe palettes. Comment down below, have you tried any of these? How did you like the formula? Did you like the old formula better than the new one? Or is this a product that you're just gonna be skipping altogether? If you like this video, push the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell button if you want to get notifications from future content. You can also find me with the same nickname, Makeup Hedgehog, on Instagram. I hope I'll see you soon in another video. Bye bye!